Hello and welcome back. If you're settling in for the night, getting comfortable, maybe putting something on in the background while you wind down, I hope tonight is a good one for you. Tonight we're spending some time with a show that I think gets genuinely underestimated. Not in a nobody knows about it sense, because plenty of people have seen it. More in a people don't quite realise how strange and good it got sense. The show is American Dad. And I want to go through the whole story, where it came from, who built it, what it actually is, why it kept running for over 2 decades, and what a few of the more interesting theories about it say about the world it's quietly been building all along. American Dad has always lived in the shadow of Family Guy, which is understandable given that they share a creator in Seth MacFarlane and aired on the same network for years. But the longer you spend with both of them, the more obvious it becomes that they're genuinely different shows. Family Guy is about chaos and cutaway gags and a certain kind of relentless energy. American Dad is about something slower and stranger. It started as political satire. It evolved into something that critics eventually described as the weirdest show in network prime time. And it did all of that quietly, without the fanfare that a show like that probably deserved. The show premiered on February 6, 2005, right after Super Bowl 39, and it's still going as of 2026, having just returned to its original home at Fox after a decade on TBS. That's over 20 years, 22 seasons, nearly 400 episodes, all built around a hyper-patriotic CII agent, his cheerfully oblivious wife, their politically opposite daughter, their nerdy son, a talking goldfish who's actually a German Olympic skier trapped in the wrong body, and an alien who lives in the attic and loves being unpleasant to everyone around him. That last one is the key to the whole show, really. But we'll get there. What I want to do tonight is just take a long, unhurried walk through everything. The origin story is genuinely interesting. It starts with 2 writers complaining about an election. The character backstories have a few surprises in them, particularly around how certain characters almost didn't exist in the form we know them. The show's evolution from one thing into another is worth tracing slowly, and some of the fan theories that have grown around it are the kind of thing you can turn over in your mind for a while without reaching a clean conclusion, which personally I find more satisfying than theories that wrap up too neatly. If you've never seen the show, I think you'll find plenty here to enjoy as a piece of television history. If you grew up on it, hopefully there are a few corners of it you haven't been in for a while. And if you're one of those people who wrote it off early, as a Family Guy knockoff, and never came back, well, that's a fair enough initial reaction. And I'm not here to argue with it, but I do think you might be pleasantly surprised by where the show ended up. Right, let's get into it. And if you enjoy what we get up to on this channel, late nights, slow walks through shows and the stories behind them, do consider subscribing. It's a small thing that genuinely helps. One last thing before the history starts. If you fall asleep somewhere in the middle of this, which is very much the hope, the sections are built to be self-contained. You won't miss a payoff that requires everything before it. Each part sits alongside the others rather than building to something. So wherever you drift off is fine. The show kept going for over 20 seasons. There's no shortage of material. The story of how American Dad came to exist is one of those origin stories that starts with 2 people being annoyed rather than inspired, which honestly might be the most relatable creative origin story I've ever come across. It was right after the 2000 United States presidential election, and Seth MacFarlane and a writer named Matt Weitzman were, as MacFarlane later described it, so frustrated with the Bush administration that we would just spend days bitching and complaining. He wasn't being dramatic about that. This was the era of hanging chads and contested recounts and a political climate that felt, to a lot of people in the entertainment industry, genuinely alarming. And MacFarlane and Weitzman, rather than just continuing to be frustrated about it over lunches, decided they should probably channel all that energy into something, preferably something creative, preferably something profitable. The original idea they landed on was an updated version of All in the Family, If you know that show, and if you don't, it aired on CBS from 1971 to 1979 and was built entirely around the tension between a working-class, deeply conservative father, played by Carol O'Connor, and the more liberal world emerging around him. You can see exactly how the American Dad premise grew from that seed. A right-wing father, a left-wing daughter, real friction, real political arguments, the kind of comedy that comes from watching two people who love each other but fundamentally see the country they're living in completely differently. MacFarlane brought the idea to Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman, both of whom had been writers on Family Guy and were looking for something to step into. Barker has described the call simply. MacFarlane rang and asked if he and Weitzman would be interested in working on a show about a right-wing CIA agent and his liberal daughter. His answer was essentially immediate. It was right up our alley, he said, and they started building. What they were building at that point was specific. Stan Smith would be a weapons expert at the CIA. He would be a devoted Republican and a devoted patriot in the most earnest, uncritical, American flag-on-everything way. His daughter Haley would be a liberal activist who had somehow grown up in the same house as this man and turned into his ideological opposite. The tension between them would drive the comedy. The CIA setting would give the show an excuse to go bigger and stranger than a pure domestic sitcom could. And they needed someone, or something else in the house, that would add a layer of total unreality to the whole thing. That someone was Roger. But we'll get to Roger properly in a bit, because he deserves his own space. In September 2003, Variety reported that Fox had ordered a pilot presentation for the show, tentatively titled American Dad, which is exactly what it stayed, with the possibility of it launching as early as fall 2004. At that point, Fox was actively trying to build a broader stable of adult animated comedies. Family Guy had already been cancelled by then. Fox pulled it in 2002, a decision we'll touch on later, and the network saw an opportunity to develop something new. The actual pilot that Barker and Weitzman made to sell the show to Fox was 6 minutes long. Not a full episode. 6 minutes. A condensed version of what would eventually become the series premiere, made specifically to demonstrate the concept in a room full of executives. It was never publicly aired. It disappeared into the vaults where development material goes. But it did its job. Fox greenlit the show. And here's the circumstance that shaped everything that came after. The Super Bowl 39 premiere date was set, February 6th, 2005, which meant American Dad would be introduced to one of the largest possible television audiences in one go. 15.1 million people watched the first episode. That remains the highest single-night audience the show has ever had. 3 months later, Family Guy came back. Fox had revived it. DVD sales and repeat viewing figures had convinced the network that cancelling Family Guy had been a mistake, and they brought it back for a 4th season that began in May 2005. Which meant that MacFarlane was suddenly involved with 2 animated shows at once. An American Dad, the newer one, the one that hadn't established itself yet, was often treated as the secondary concern. Almost by default, Lane has been candid about this. In the early seasons, he described himself as just going along for the ride on American Dad. He didn't fully understand what Barker and Weitzman were building. He was focused on Family Guy. He handed the creative lead to his co-creators and checked in from the margins. And this specific act of stepping back is probably the most consequential thing MacFarlane ever did for American Dad. Because the show that Barker and Weitzman built without him in the driver's seat turned out to be genuinely its own thing. Not the same show with different characters. Not an animated sitcom following the same template. Something stranger and more committed to its own specific weirdness. The distance MacFarlane maintained in those early years gave American Dad room to figure out what it was. And what it figured out turned out to be quite good. There's one more thing worth knowing about the political premise before we move on. The creators have said, looking back, that they realised fairly early on that building an entire show on Bush-era political satire wasn't going to sustain them long term. As Weitzman put it years later, doing lots of jokes about Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not going to hold our audience. The cultural moment that inspired the show was always going to pass. Political satire dates badly when the specific political context shifts. So they made a choice, slowly and without fanfare, to let that political scaffolding fall away and figure out what the show was actually about underneath it. And then came the move to TBS, but we'll get there. What's worth dwelling on a little longer here is what it actually meant, practically, for MacFarlane to hand the show to Barker and Weitzman. It wasn't just a management decision. In the early years of a new show, the creator's taste and instincts are the show's spine. When MacFarlane stepped back from the day-to-day, he left a gap that Barker and Weitzman had to fill with their own taste and instincts. And their instincts turned out to be different from MacFarlane's, not in opposition to his, but different. They were less interested in the rapid-fire pop culture gag, more interested in what happened when you took a premise seriously and followed it somewhere it hadn't been expected to go, more interested in character logic than in punchline efficiency. The result of that difference is the show's most distinctive quality. American Dad is a patient show. It waits. It lets premises breathe. It trusts that if you put these specific people into a specific situation and follow the logic of who they are, something interesting will happen, and it usually does. That patience came from Barker and Weitzman, not from the broader MacFarlane sensibility, and it's the reason American Dad felt like a genuinely different show from Family Guy, even in the years when the two were airing back-to-back on the same network. MacFarlane has said in retrospect that once the show found its own identity, he was happy to let it be that he came to appreciate what Barker and Weitzman had built separate from his oversight. Whether he would have built the same thing if he'd stayed in the driver's seat is one of those counterfactuals that's genuinely impossible to answer. But the show that exists is the show that was made by people who were given room to figure it out on their own. And that room, created accidentally by a scheduling conflict, turned out to be exactly what the show needed. Now, talking a bit about the pilot episode itself, the one that actually aired, not the 6-minute pitch, it's called simply Pilot, and it introduced every main character in quick succession, while setting up the core dynamics the show would spend 20 years riffing on. Stan rigs his son Steve's school election, so Steve will become more popular. Roger makes a noise in the middle of the night, and Stan goes downstairs convinced there's an intruder. The episode isn't the best thing the show ever made, pilots rarely are, but it has a clarity of purpose that a lot of pilot episodes lack. You understand immediately who everyone is and what the fault lines are. Stan loves America so much, it borders on pathological. Francine is warm and capable and slightly bewildered by the household she's running. Haley thinks her father is at best misguided and at worst dangerously so. Steve is trying to navigate adolescence while living inside what is, by any objective measure, a completely abnormal family situation. One of the small details in the pilot that people sometimes bring up is that it was leaked online before it aired. In early 2005, a copy of the episode made it onto the internet before the Fox broadcast, which wasn't exactly common practice at the time for major network premieres. The show survived the leak. 15.1 million viewers watched it on broadcast anyway. The mixed critical reception to the pilot is also worth sitting with because it became a self-fulfilling story for a while. A lot of early reviews compared American Dad unfavourably to its sibling show. The comparison was obvious enough on the surface. Same creator, same network, adult animated sitcom, and early reviewers didn't look too hard past that surface. The dismissal stuck around long enough to shape the show's early reputation in a way that took years to fully shake off, which is a shame because the shows are genuinely different things if you watch them with any attention. Family Guy's comedy comes from interruption, from gags that break the narrative and then return to it. American Dad, even in its earliest form, was more interested in sustained character work, in putting these specific people in a situation and following that situation wherever it led, rather than cutting away from it to do something else. The other thing the pilot established, and this is easy to underestimate, is the show's relationship with Langley Falls, Virginia. The fictional town where the Smiths live takes its name from the real locations of Langley and Great Falls in Fairfax County. It sits close enough to Washington, D.C. that the CIA headquarters, being Stan's office, is geographically plausible, and far enough into suburban Virginia that the show can use the specific texture of upper-middle-class American suburban life as both setting and target. The Smith house on Cherry Street becomes, over 20 years, one of those animated homes with hidden depths, rooms that appear once and vanish, secret facilities, unexplained spaces. It's a completely normal-looking house from the outside and something considerably stranger inside. That gap between the normal exterior and the strange interior is honestly a pretty good description of the show itself. Since we're now talking about who lives in that house, let's go through the family properly, because every main character in American Dad has a specific backstory, and a few of them have origin stories that are more interesting than they might first appear. Stan Smith is voiced by Seth MacFarlane, and Stan's voice is deliberately distinct from anything MacFarlane had done before. It's clipped, military, a certain kind of squareness built into the rhythm of it. MacFarlane has done plenty of voices across his career: Peter Griffin, Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, but Stan has a quality the others don't, which is a genuine absence of self-awareness. Peter Griffin knows on some level that he's ridiculous. Stan doesn't. Stan thinks he's a reasonable man making reasonable decisions. That conviction, even when he's doing something completely unreasonable, is what makes him consistently funny without needing the show to lean on him being stupid. He's not stupid. He's wrong in a very specific and committed way. Stan is 42 years old, a CII field agent and weapons expert under Deputy Director A.Y. Ver-E Bull-Ock, and he has worked for the agency since the 1980s. His father, Jack Smith, was largely absent during his childhood. Stan worshipped him as a child, and later discovered, in one of the show's more properly gutting revelations, that his father was actually a jewel thief rather than the principled spy Stan had imagined him to be. This backstory feeds directly into Stan's almost religious devotion to the CII. When your actual father is a disappointing fiction, a government institution becomes a useful replacement. The show understands this about him without being heavy-handed about it. Francine Smith is voiced by Wendy Schaal, and Francine is one of the more quietly surprising characters in the show. The description in early pitches, blissfully unaware, sounds like it's setting up a traditional sitcom wife who exists primarily as a foil. And in the first season or two, Francine is somewhat in that lane. But the show gradually revealed that there is considerably more going on with her. She's a trained combatant. She has a dark side she exercises without much visible guilt. She once chopped off her own hand in an attempt to kill George Clooney. She is, by her own admission, capable of things that make Stan look almost measured by comparison. And all of this sits comfortably inside the character, because Schaal has always played Francine as a woman who is warm and genuinely loving first, and dangerous second in that specific order. Francine's backstory involves being abandoned at an airport as a child by her biological parents, who left her there so they could have more overhead space for luggage on a flight to the Bahamas. Not a metaphor. That actually happened. In the world of the show, she was subsequently adopted by a Chinese-American family, the Lings, and then later married into the affluent Smiths, which is where Stan enters the picture. Terms of abandonment and adoption in Francine's past are referenced periodically throughout the show. usually in ways that are funnier than they probably should be, which is a skill American Dad has in particular: abundance. Hayley Smith is voiced by Rachel McFarlane, Seth MacFarlane's actual younger sister. This is the kind of casting detail that sounds like a nepotism note, but actually worked out well, because the MacFarlane sibling dynamic gives the Stan-Hayley relationship a slightly different texture than you'd get from two strangers performing at each other. Rachel released a jazz album called Hayley Sings in 2012. She's been asked about it in interviews in the context of the show, and her perspective on their shared working relationship is warm. She's described the show's longevity as something an animated cast can sustain in a way a live-action one can't. We're aging, but our characters aren't. Steve Smith is voiced by Scott Grimes, and Steve is the character who gets underestimated most consistently by people who write about the show. The description, nerdy teenage son, does not fully capture what Grimes brought to the role. Steve is optimistic in a way that borders on delusional, which is charming. He has three close friends, Snot, Toshi, and Barry, who are each comic characters in their own right. He has a recurring interest in girls that the show treats with actual sympathy rather than pure mockery. And he has a relationship with Roger that produces some of the show's best comedic pairings, which we'll get into when we talk about Roger's personas. Scott Grimes, incidentally, has also released music, 3 albums, across different periods of his career. Klose Heisler is the German goldfish, and his origin story is one of the show's best-running pieces of lore. Klaus is not naturally a goldfish. He was an East German Olympic skier whose brain was switched with that of a goldfish by CII technology, specifically to prevent him from winning a gold medal at the 1986 Winter Olympics. He has lived in the Smith household ever since, trapped in a bowl, watching everything, wanting desperately to be part of the family in a way the family has never quite allowed. The voice is provided by D. Bradley Baker, and here's the detail that changes everything. Klaus was not originally German, the character was written as French. His name was Francois. When Baker came into audition, he told the producers his French accent wasn't particularly good, and offered to do the lines in German instead. They liked it. They liked it enough that the character was rewritten from scratch. New name, new nationality, new backstory involving the East German sports program and the 1986 Winter Olympics, rather than whatever the French version would have been. Baker beat out Billy West and John DiMaggio for the role, both of whom were, and remain, 2 of the most respected voice actors in animation. Best known for Billy West's many major Futurama characters, and John DiMaggio's role as Bender.T, that a humble admission about a weak French accent led to Baker getting a role over West. And DiMaggio is the kind of thing that seems improbable when you write it down, but that's what happened. Jeff Fisher is voiced by an actor named Jeff Fisher, not a character named after the actor, an actor named after the character, or the other way around, depending on which came first. He plays Hayley's boyfriend and later husband, a stoner, fundamentally good-natured, not particularly quick on the uptake, deeply loyal. Jeff moved into the Smith household after Stan demolished his van with a wrecking ball to drive him away from Hayley. The plan did not work. Jeff stayed. Jeff has, across the run of the show, been launched into space by Roger, killed by aliens, had his brain implanted into an alien body, and been reborn as a human after Roger ate his brain and rebirthed him. Which is a sentence that requires the show to have been running for quite a while before it makes any kind of internal sense. AY Very Bull Ock, Stan's CIA boss, is a recurring presence throughout the show, voiced by Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart, doing a broadly American accent, with occasional flashes of his natural Meyerfield in West Yorkshire underneath it, playing a character who is supposedly one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the United States, but frequently behaves as though he's the least responsible person in any given room, has clearly enjoyed the role. The deputy director has done things across the show's run that would end careers in any real intelligence agency, and he has done them with the particular confidence of a man who knows he will face no consequences. These are the people who populate Cherry Street: Lang Lee Falls, a CII agent, his secretly dangerous wife, their politically opposite children, a goldfish with existential problems, a stoner who became part of the family by accident, a Patrick Stewart character in charge of national security, and the alien in the attic, who we really do need to discuss properly now. One more thing before moving on though, because the supporting characters around the main family are worth a quick moment. Greg and Terry, the gay couple who live across the street, and also happen to be local news anchors for WANG-TV, are recurring presences who the show handles with considerably more warmth and consistency than a lot of animated sitcoms managed in 2005. Principal Bry Unella ISS at Steve's school, Pearl Bailey High School, is a character who is functionally the most irresponsible person in any given scene he appears in, and is funny almost every time. Friend group, Snot, whose full name is Shmoo Lee Lone Stein, Tiochi Da, and Barry Robinson, each have specific comic personalities that the show returns to reliably. Barry, it's revealed eventually, is kept somewhat calm by medication. Off his medication, Barry becomes something considerably more alarming. The show built a neighbourhood that feels lived in, not in the sense that it's realistic, it absolutely isn't, but in the sense that returning characters behave consistently and have histories that the writers clearly remember. That kind of institutional memory, maintained across two networks, is harder to sustain than it looks. Roger Smith is a grey space alien. He lives in the Smith family attic. He is one of the strangest and most fully realised comic characters in the history of American animated television, which is a statement I'm aware sounds overwrought for a character who spends a lot of his time getting drunk and scheming to get free stuff. But I stand by it. Give me a few minutes. Let's start with the official backstory. In 1947, Roger was being chased through space by a hostile alien when he crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. Well connection is deliberate. The show is playing with one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in American culture. The idea that something actually crashed in New Mexico in 1947 and that the government covered it up. In Roger's version of events, the crash was real, and what crashed was him. He wandered the desert after the crash, encountered a Bible salesman, and was taken in. He crashed in Roswell in 1947 and was soon captured by the government, eventually being turned over to the CIA and held at Area 51 4 years before the show begins. Stan Smith was an intelligence officer stationed at Area 51, escaped from his holding cell one night, triggering a lockdown. Stan tracked him down in a kitchen and was about to shoot him when the security team opened fire on the room. Roger pulled Stan behind a counter. They slid down a laundry chute together, landed in a truck, and a grenade blew up the room they'd been in. Roger saved Stan's life. Stan offered to repay him in any way he could. Roger asked to live with Stan's family. Stan introduced him to his children as a birthday present for Steve. This is Roger's entire reason for being in the house. He saved Stan's life and claimed his reward. Whether Stan fully understood what he was agreeing to at the time is the kind of question the show doesn't ask directly, but it implies the answer might be no. Roger is voiced by Seth MacFarlane, doing a deliberate imitation of Paul Lynde, the American actor who was a fixture of 1960s and 70s television, best known for the role of Uncle Arthur in Bewitched and as the Center Square in Hollywood Squares. Lynde had a very particular quality: dry, superior, self-amused, with a barbed wit that always felt like it was slightly ahead of everyone else in the room. MacFarlane took that quality and put it inside a grey alien, and the result is a voice that is identifiable within 2 syllables every time. The show's creators have acknowledged openly that the original Roger concept was basically ALF, the 1980s alien sitcom character who lived with a suburban American family. Roger started as that, the alien in the house who has to hide from the outside world. In the first season or two, this restriction was still in place. Roger couldn't leave the house because the Smiths wanted to conceal his existence as an alien from the outside world, eated a certain kind of comedy. Cabin fever. Roger scheming to get things delivered to the house. Roger playing games with whoever was home. But the restriction didn't last, and what replaced it was considerably more interesting. The writers introduced Roger's personas, his ability to wear disguises, not just physical disguises, but complete alternate identities, costumes with personalities attached, lives built around them. And the more the writers leaned into this, the more the persona system expanded until it became, essentially, a show within a show. Roger could be anyone, any age, any gender, any profession. The same alien underneath all of them, with the same fundamental character, but surrounded by layers of invented context that gave individual episodes enormous tonal flexibility. There is, though, one piece of Roger's internal biology that the show revealed gradually, and that reframes everything he does once you know it. It's in an episode called Franny 911, and it goes like this. Roger's species is physically required to release all unpleasantries, every unkind thought, every selfish impulse, every cruel scheme. If they don't, those unpleasantries turn into a kind of poison inside them and kill them. Roger is not an awful person by preference. He is an awful alien by biological necessity. This does not make him less awful to be around, but it changes the moral texture of the thing, slightly. He isn't choosing this. He literally cannot not be this, and the people he is awful to, most frequently, are the people he spends the most time with, which means the Smiths are, in a genuinely twisted way, the most important people in his life, his targets and his family, simultaneously. The show handles Roger's character by keeping that love-hate dynamic visible. The Smiths are constantly complaining about Roger, constantly dealing with the fallout of his schemes, constantly picking up pieces he shattered, and they keep letting him stay. There are episodes where he leaves or gets kicked out, and episodes where the Smiths do everything they can to get him back. The show has been clear through these episodes that the family has chosen him, not because he's easy to live with, because they actually love him. MacFarlane's commitment to the voice across 20+ years is worth acknowledging separately. Roger Hey Roger has evolved. The character in Season 20 is considerably richer and stranger than the character in Season 1, but MacFarlane has maintained Roger's Paul Lynde-inspired voice through all of it, adding shading without losing the original register, long-haul performance of a genuinely unusual kind. One more thing about Roger's biology, since we're on it. He also excretes golden jewel-encrusted turds. This is established in the first season, treated as a throwaway detail, and then becomes one of the most elaborate running background jokes in television history. But that gets its own section, because it deserves one. For now, the shape of Roger is this. He crashed in 1947. He was captured. He saved a CII agent and moved into his attic. He is required by his biology to be unpleasant. He has constructed hundreds of personas and lived dozens of parallel lives through them. He is voiced by Seth MacFarlane, imitating a 1970s game show panelist, specifically Paul Lynde. Progressively across the whole run, the most purely enjoyable character to follow in the show. Whether that was the plan from the beginning or an accident that the writers recognised and leaned into, the result is the same. That's Roger, the alien who had to be unpleasant, the character who started as a one-note elf reference and became the engine of one of the weirdest shows on American television. What's interesting about Roger's arc across the show is that the writers got very comfortable over time with exploring the darker end of his personality in ways that the early seasons wouldn't have gone. The original Roger was contained, scheming, yes, self-serving, yes, but the schemes were domestic scale things. Getting a free blender, manipulating someone at the house, being annoying about food. As the show evolved and the writers grew more confident, Roger's actions escalated significantly. He launched Haley's husband Jeff into space. He ran criminal operations under several of his personas. He committed acts that the show treated as funny, while clearly being, by any objective measure, fairly awful. And crucially, the show never punished him for it in any lasting way. Roger resets. The Smiths forget. The world absorbs whatever he did and moves on. Whether you read that as a commentary on how charming people get away with things, or as the natural floating timeline of an animated sitcom, or as something specific to Roger's alien nature, that his species operates outside normal consequence, is worth turning over a bit. The show, to its credit, lets all of those readings coexist. The Roswell connection in Roger's backstory also does quiet work that the show never belabors. Roswell in American cultural mythology is specifically about government cover-up, about the state hiding things from its own people. And here is the CII in this show, both the institution that covered Roger up and the institution that employs the man who eventually took him in. The CII hid a real alien in Area 51 for decades, and then one of its own agents effectively freed him by owing him a favour. There's a small irony there about how these things actually resolve, not through transparency or justice, but through personal obligation and accident that the show wears lightly. Roger's relationship with each member of the Smith family is also worth noting separately, because they're all genuinely different. With Stan, there's a core dynamic of mutual irritation covering genuine fondness. Stan complains about Roger constantly. Roger exploits Stan's tolerance constantly, and there are recurring moments. The episode You Det Your Life is a good example, where Stan admits, against his own interest and to his own surprise, that he actually misses Roger when Roger is gone. With Steve, it's a partnership. Steve is young enough to find Roger's personas exciting rather than alarming, and enough of an optimist to keep believing Roger might occasionally be redeemed. With Francine, Roger has always been slightly softer than with the rest of the family. They've done role-play scenarios together. They have something approaching a genuine friendship. With Haley, the relationship is one of mutual low-level contempt that softens in specific episodes where the show wants to use it differently. And with Klaus in the fishbowl, there is a frenemy energy that the show minds consistently. Klaus does things to get Roger into trouble. Roger responds by knocking Klaus's bowl off surfaces. None of these relationships follow a single fixed template. They shift with the episode, which is one of the reasons Roger is so consistently interesting to watch. He's a different character depending on who he's talking to, even before he puts on a costume. Since we're on the topic of how the show evolved, let's talk about the transformation itself, because it's a stranger and more gradual process than most accounts of American Dad tend to give it credit for. The first season of the show is recognisably political in a way the later seasons are not. Stan profiles his Iranian-American neighbours as potential terrorists because of their heritage. He rigged a school election. He tries to prevent his daughter from attending political rallies. The comedy in these episodes comes primarily from the collision between Stan's ideology and a world that doesn't conform to it. The jokes are about specific political attitudes, about post-9/11 American anxiety, about conservative family values, about the gap between what someone says they believe and how they actually behave at home. This worked. The first season got decent ratings and established the show's identity clearly enough, but the writers could feel, fairly quickly, that the political scaffolding had limits. You can only do so many variations on Stan's ideology leads him into trouble, before the joke starts repeating itself. And more practically, topical political humour dates. A joke about the Bush administration in 2005 lands differently in 2008 and differently again in 2012. The specific cultural moment the show was born into was always going to become a historical artifact. So the shift happened, slowly and without announcement, starting around season 2 and continuing through seasons 3 and 4. The political elements didn't vanish. Stan remains a Republican CIA agent throughout the run, but they receded from being the primary comedy engine to being one note in a much larger arrangement. What came forward instead was character-based absurdism, sustained premises, the willingness to commit to a strange idea for an entire episode and follow it wherever it went. Some of the things the show did during this evolution are worth just naming, because they give a sense of the range the writers were finding. There is an episode where Stan switches minds with a horse to win a race. There is an episode where an evil sentient hot tub systematically kills the people around Stan. There is an episode where Roger accidentally causes the apocalypse. There is an episode structured entirely as a silent black and white film. There is an episode in the attic of the Smith house that reveals it contains a fully operational bar Roger has been running under his various personas for years without the family knowing. There is an episode where the family is trapped inside a video game. There is an episode narrated by CeeLo Green. The show that started as an updated All in the Family became something that defies easy categorization. It kept the family dynamics, actually deepened them over time, while adding a layer of sustained genre experimentation that most animated sitcoms never reach because it's genuinely difficult to sustain. You can do a horror episode, you can do a musical episode, doing it well, while keeping the characters recognizably themselves, while making the genre experimentation feel like an extension of the show rather than a departure from it. That's the hard part. American Dad got very good at it. The phrase that kept appearing in critical writing about the show during the TBS years, from about season 12 onwards, was the weirdest show in network prime time. A few critics used it. Fans adopted it. It became a kind of shorthand for what made American Dad different. And the interesting thing about that description is that it was intended as a compliment, not a warning. Weird in this context meant committed. Weird meant willing to go somewhere unexpected and stay there. Weird meant that when the show set up a premise, you genuinely couldn't predict where it would land. MacFarlane, who had handed the creative reins to Barker and Weitzman in those early years, has described the show's later seasons in terms that suggest he was as surprised as anyone by what it became. He said in interviews that once American Dad found its own identity, separate from Family Guy, it carved out a space that neither of his other shows had occupied. Not the chaos comedy of Family Guy, not the live-action sci-fi of the Orville. Something else. Character surrealism, maybe. The show cared about its people deeply, genuinely cared, in a way that gave the weirdest episodes emotional grounding, and used that care as the foundation for doing things that shouldn't work and somehow did. The Stan-Haley relationship is the best example of this dual commitment. Those two are never going to agree on politics. The show doesn't try to resolve that, or pretend they will, but they love each other in a way the show has always been willing to show directly, without irony, without cutting to a joke to diffuse it. In the episodes where their relationship is the focus, the comedy and the genuine feeling sit next to each other without either one undermining the other. That's not easy to write. It's even harder to sustain across a 20-plus season run. There's a specific structural quality to American Dad's weird episodes that I think explains why they work as well as they do. Family Guy's non-sequitur style is fundamentally about interruption. The show breaks its own story to show you something unrelated, then returns. American Dad almost never does that. When American Dad decides to do a musical episode, the entire episode is a musical. When it does a horror episode, the horror logic holds for the full runtime. When it does a genre parody, the parody is committed and thorough rather than superficial. The writers trust their own ideas enough to see them through, which means the audience has to trust the writers, and the track record the show has built earns that trust. The other thing worth noting is what didn't change as the show got weirder. The core character dynamics stayed intact. Stan remained Stan. Francine remained Francine. The fundamental relationships between people didn't mutate just because the plots around them got stranger. The weird premises worked because the people inside them were stable enough for the audience to hold on to. Roger being in 300 disguises is funnier when you always know exactly who Roger is underneath them. Stan building elaborate, catastrophic solutions to simple problems is funnier when you understand precisely what he's afraid of and why. American Dad at its peak is a show about extremely consistent people doing extremely inconsistent things. And that tension, the reliable character inside the surreal situation, is the source of most of its best comedy. One more aspect of the evolution that deserves a moment: the show's relationship with its own continuity. Most animated sitcoms in this tradition use what fans call a floating timeline. Nothing ages, nothing sticks. Whatever happened last week is effectively erased by this week. American Dad has always had a more complicated relationship with this than most people who haven't watched it closely would expect. The Golden Turd storyline, which we'll get to in a moment, ran for 15 years across dozens of episodes, hiding in the background of larger plots like a patient joke. Jeff Fisher's voyage into space in Season 9 was followed up in a later episode that treated the events as completely real and consequential. Relationships develop. Characters make references to things that happened years earlier. The show isn't serialized in a formal sense, but it has a memory that most shows in its genre don't bother to maintain. And that memory is part of what makes the weirdness feel earned rather than random. Strange things happen in Langley Falls, and Langley Falls remembers them. One of the show's more underrated qualities during its evolution is how it handled Stan's growth without ever actually resolving him. Stan learns things in individual episodes, specific tactical lessons, specific corrections about specific situations, but the fundamental architecture of who he is remains intact. He always returns to baseline. This sounds like a criticism, the kind of "these characters never change" complaint that gets levelled at long-running animated sitcoms, but in Stan's case, it's actually structural. The comedy of watching him requires him to be consistently wrong about the world in his particular way. If Stan actually changed, if he softened, if he became more politically open, if he stopped treating every domestic situation as a potential counterintelligence threat, you'd lose the character. The show knows this. It keeps him fixed while moving everything around him. Francine's arc across the show's evolution is the opposite, and it's more interesting in some ways. She becomes more visible. The early seasons present her as warm and supportive and slightly peripheral. The later seasons progressively reveal what she's capable of. The dark side the warmth was covering. The skills the housewife role was obscuring. She was always those things. The show just took its time letting you see them. That gradual revelation over many seasons has a satisfying quality that's easy to miss if you're watching the show in chunks rather than across its full run. But it's there. Now let's talk about the Golden Turd, because it deserves more than a footnote, and because the way the show handled it across 15 years is genuinely one of the more ambitious things any animated sitcom has ever quietly done in the background of its own episodes. It starts in Season 1, in an episode called Homeland Security, one of the early episodes, still rooted in the political satire mode, about Stan profiling his new Iranian-American neighbours as potential terrorists, the main plot. In the background of this episode, almost incidentally, Roger reveals to two strangers named Mikey and Jim that he occasionally excretes golden, jewel-encrusted turds. He shows he leaves one for them to find. He's stunned. The episode moves on. Mikey and Jim, however, do not. What follows across the next 16 years is a B story that runs in fragments through random episodes, a mini-saga about what the golden turd does to whoever possesses it, any supernatural mechanism. The turd doesn't curse people. It doesn't have powers. It's just extremely valuable. And the show tracks, with a kind of deadpan commitment, what extremely valuable things do to ordinary people who encounter them. Jim kills Mikey for it. This happens quickly and almost off-screen, the violence casual and immediate. Jim then reveals he has fallen in love with Francine and tries to kill Stan. He drives his car onto railroad tracks and lets a train kill him. Passes to a police officer named Eddie Thacker, who finds it in the aftermath of the accident and hides it from his partner. Eddie and his wife begin dreaming about what it will pay for. A great retirement. Eel's guilty. He wants to return it. His wife poisons his tea. The lieutenant's wife goes to death row for his murder. And when she's executed, the golden turd passes to her son, Vincent. Vincent becomes obsessed, enters politics. His campaign implodes. He's shot by Secret Service agents, and the turd rolls under a chair in the chaos. Woman finds it. She takes it to the Vatican and presents it to the Pope. Each of these chapters is brief, usually no more than a couple of minutes, tucked into the middle of an episode about something else entirely. The golden turd is almost never the main event, aside from a later episode where its saga finally takes centre stage. Alongside the main event, doing its quiet damage to a parade of strangers. The concept here, once you trace it, is recognisably Tolkien. The turd is the ring. It doesn't command people. It just reveals what they're already capable of when given something to want badly enough. And the show plays this completely straight. No winking, no acknowledgement that it's doing something unusual. The stranger-focused golden turd vignettes are shot and scripted with the same matter-of-fact tone as the main family plots, which makes them funnier and stranger simultaneously. There's also a cameo that connects the turd back to the main plot in a way that felt like a blink and miss moment at first. In Rapture's Delight, one of the show's most celebrated episodes, which we'll discuss properly in the next section, Jesus Christ returns the golden turd to Roger, who needs it to power his spaceship during the final battle between Stan and the Antichrist. Roger needed the turd for spacecraft fuel. Jesus had it. He gave it back. The episode treated this as completely logical within its own absurd internal consistency, and it is once you've been following the golden turd across 4 or 5 seasons. The real convergence came in the 300th episode. That milestone episode, simply titled 300, aired during the TBS era, finally brought the golden turd front and centre after nearly a decade of patient background work. The saga that had been building across several episodes, buried in B-plots that casual viewers might not even have noticed, finally took the spotlight. Den Turd's full history was resolved, the timeline was rewritten, and the episode gave a payoff to something the show had been building since season 1 without ever explicitly flagging that it was building it. This is, honestly, impressive. Not because the golden turd is a particularly meaningful piece of storytelling, it isn't. It's a golden excrement MacGuffin in a cartoon. But the patience required to develop something across 15 seasons, across 2 different networks, across years of production and staff changes, and to have the payoff land with the weight of something the audience had actually been waiting for, even if they hadn't realised they were waiting for it, demonstrates a kind of long-game institutional memory that is rare, and Dad kept track. Even when the show changed, even when the network changed, someone always knew where the golden turd was. There's a lesson in there about storytelling, probably, or about consequences, or about what happens when you give ordinary people access to extraordinary things. The show never states the lesson. It just runs the vignettes, keeps the camera neutral, and lets the bodies pile up quietly in the background, while Stan is arguing with Haley about something in the foreground. What made the Golden Turd saga different from the kind of Easter egg hunting that shows sometimes do, hiding references for superfans to find, is that the vignettes were always self-contained enough to work on their own. You didn't need to know the full history to enjoy any individual chapter. Jim killing Mikey is funny and grim, whether you know it's part of a longer story or not. The politician's campaign unravelling is watchable as a standalone piece of deadpan political satire. Each chapter works independently. The saga was an additional layer, not a prerequisite. That's the craft of it. You could watch American Dad for years and notice the Golden Turd vignettes as recurring odd little sketches without tracking them as connected. And you could watch it as someone tracking the full saga and get a second, richer experience of the same material. The show built a double floor into the narrative and offered both levels simultaneously. There were reportedly chapters in the saga that were written but cut for time across various seasons. Scripts describe additional storylines involving the turd being buried in a condo in Boca Raton, a Cuban crime boss, and a liquor store delivery man that were abandoned during production. The fact that there was enough material cut to constitute several additional chapters suggests the writers were genuinely enjoying the project. It wasn't a cynical recurring gag, it was something they clearly found funny in itself, which is why it remained coherent across such a long stretch. One final thought on the Golden Turd. Roger, excreting something valuable that destroys everyone who encounters it, is, if you squint, a perfect metaphor for Roger himself. He produces something remarkable. Other people's lives unravel around it. He moves on completely unaffected. The turd is Roger's influence in portable form. The show probably didn't intend it that way, but it fits. And there's something specifically American Dad about the whole enterprise that's worth sitting with for a second. This is a show set in the orbit of the CII, an institution whose whole identity is built on long-game patience, cultivating assets for years, waiting for intelligence to become relevant, playing multi-decade geopolitical chess. The Golden Turd saga is American Dad doing that. Patient, unhurried, tracking something across seasons without rushing to resolve it. The show absorbed the patience of its own setting. Whether that's a conscious thematic echo or just the writers having fun with a recurring bit, the effect is the same. A joke told so slowly and so straight that by the time the convergence arrives, the audience has almost forgotten there was a setup. There's also a practical argument for why the Golden Turd saga could only exist in this particular show. It required everyone involved to remember it and honour it across staff changes, network changes, and production cycles that would have caused most shows to simply forget. Some writers at American Dad, and this is just inference, not something anyone has confirmed, must have kept running notes on the Golden Turd's status specifically to ensure continuity across seasons. The small specific background detail that could easily have been abandoned as a one-off joke in Season 1 was still being tracked in Season 15 at a different network. That's a level of creative housekeeping that says something about the culture Barker and Weitzman built. Now let's talk about some of the episodes themselves, because the show's reputation rests on specific things it did in specific moments, and the moments are worth visiting properly. I want to go through 7 episodes, not a definitive ranking, just a selection of the ones that tend to come up when people talk about what makes American Dad worth watching. Each of them illustrates a different aspect of what the show became as it evolved. Let's start with Rapture's Delight. This is a Season 5 Christmas episode, and it's probably the most cited example of American Dad doing something that should be ridiculous and making it work through sheer commitment. The premise: Stan and Francine can't find good seats at church on Christmas Day. Stan spends the service distracted and irritable, and then the rapture happens. Every righteous soul in the world ascends to heaven simultaneously, and Stan and Francine are among the people left behind. Stan blames Francine. They separate. 7 years pass. Francine has been living in the post-apocalyptic wasteland with a man she later discovers is Jesus Christ, back on Earth for the final battle. Stan, meanwhile, has become a hardened survivor in the ruins of civilization, carrying weapons and wearing road warrior leather. The Antichrist, voiced by Andy Samberg and played as a parody of the Riddler, kidnaps Francine. Jesus team up to rescue her. Stan sacrifices himself in the final battle. He earns his place in heaven. The episode works because it takes its premise entirely seriously. The post-apocalyptic setting is rendered properly. The Stan-Francine emotional arc, their separation over Stan's selfishness, their eventual reconciliation, is handled with genuine care. And the comedy doesn't come from mocking the genre or winking at the audience about how absurd the premise is. It comes from putting Stan specifically, this particular character, with his specific flaws, inside the apocalypse and watching how he responds. The episode is consistently cited as one of the show's best, and it deserves that reputation. Moving on to Tearjerker, which is season 3. This one is an extended James Bond parody in which Roger plays the villain, a failed actor who was laughed out of an audition for Monsters Ball and has responded by deciding to create the world's saddest film, a movie so emotionally devastating that audiences will literally cry themselves to death. The film, ironically titled Oscar Gold, is a meticulous satirical checklist of every Oscar bait trope in existence. Stan plays the field agent trying to stop him. What makes Tearjerker work is the same thing that makes Roger's best episodes work generally. The character understands villain logic from the inside. Roger as Tearjerker isn't parodying Bond villains from the outside. He is a Bond villain, operating entirely within the internal logic of that character type. The disproportionate response to a small slight, the elaborately constructed revenge scheme, the lair and the henchmen and the impossible plans. And because Roger genuinely believes in what he's doing, the parody has weight. It's not just references, it's a character study in the specific psychology of a man who decided that cinema was the correct vehicle for personal revenge. Lost in Space is season 8, and it's the episode that gave Hayley's husband, Jeff Fisher, his proper moment. For context, Jeff had been launched into space by Roger in the season 9 premiere of the Fox run. Roger had intended to use a spacecraft belonging to his own alien species to escape Earth, but instead threw Jeff into it and stayed behind. Jeff then disappeared from the show for several episodes while the plot threads around his absence played out. When the follow-up episode came, it told Jeff's full story, captured by an alien mothership, forced to make fast food for his alien captors, and eventually given a test. If he can prove he's capable of love, he'll be freed. The test involves a probe entering Jeff's mind and playing him a montage of his memories with Hayley, set to an unreleased song by the band Wax Fang, sometimes referred to as The Astronaut Part 2, quiet, genuinely moving piece of music, and the episode uses it with real care. For a character who had spent years as comic relief, the lovable stoner who wandered into the family by accident, the episode revealed that Jeff's devotion to Hayley was the most real and consistent thing about him. The moment works precisely because the show had never asked the audience to take Jeff this seriously before. The surprise of the sincerity is what makes it land. Hot Water is the season 8 premiere, and it is a full musical episode structured as a parody of Little Shop of Horrors. Stan buys a talking hot tub. The hot tub starts killing his family and friends, one by one. The episode is narrated by CeeLo Green. The songs were written by Asa Taccone, brother of Jorma Taccone of The Lonely Island, and they're genuinely good. Not parody good, actually a good. A song CA song called Daddy's Gone, performed by Steve Smith and Roger, was made available on iTunes immediately after the episode aired. Sode was nominated for a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. Mike Barker later revealed that when Hot Water was made, the creative team thought the show might not be renewed. They made it as a possible series finale, which is why Stan dies at the end, something the show reset in subsequent episodes. The knowledge that this might have been the last episode shaped what they put into it. We thought, what better way to end the series? Kill the main character. It wasn't the last episode, but it has the energy of an episode made by people who wanted to leave something memorable behind just in case. The 200 is the 200th episode, and it celebrates its own milestone in the most American Dad way possible. Roger accidentally causes the apocalypse, and all 200 of his personas simultaneously take physical form. The post-apocalyptic wasteland of Langley Falls is populated by 200 versions of Roger in 200 different costumes, each one operating according to their own established character logic. Stan has to navigate through all of them while trying to reconnect with a family he's alienated. It's chaotic and dense and rewards long-term viewers who recognise the recurring personas and understand their histories. For a first-time viewer, it probably makes very little sense. For someone who's watched the show for 10 years, it's a love letter to everything the persona system had become. Rabbit Ears is from the TBS era, season 14, and it's the show's first major experiment with genuine horror aesthetics. Stan finds an old television set at the side of the road. The TV only receives one channel, a 1940s-style black and white jazz variety show hosted by a man named Alistair Kovacs, who is suave and sophisticated and gently menacing in a way the show allows to sit without resolving. Stan becomes obsessed. He begins missing dinner. Then he climbs inside the television and can't get out. The episode plays its horror straight. There's real dread in the Alistair Kovacs sequences, before resolving in the absurd fashion the show always returns to. Fans have noted that Kovacs shares several traits with the demon character Alastair from Has Been Hotel, right down to the name spelling and the jazz aesthetic. Whether that was intentional or a coincidence depends on who you ask. And then there's My Morning Straitjacket, Season 6, which is a different kind of episode entirely. Mike Barker wrote it out of genuine, personal love for the band My Morning Jacket. He's described watching one of their outdoor concerts in the rain and having the specific thought that if lightning struck the band dead at that moment, there would be nothing tragic about it. That was the best way a musician could go, having just made everyone present feel exactly what he felt at that concert. He wanted to translate that feeling through Stan. Stan tries to drag Hayley away from a My Morning Jacket concert and ends up a devoted groupie himself. The band's music plays throughout. Extended sequences of Stan describing what he hears inside the music become genuinely psychedelic. It's an episode that exists because one writer loved one band enough to build an entire episode around sharing that. That's a particular kind of storytelling, personal in the best way, using the show as a vehicle to make an audience love something the writer loves. It has a different texture from the satirical episodes, the genre parody episodes, the apocalypse episodes. It's warmer, more straightforwardly affectionate. And it works because Stan's obsessive quality, the part of him that applies CIA-level commitment to any goal he's fixated on, makes him a perfect vehicle for a story about falling unreasonably in love with a piece of music. These 7 episodes don't represent everything the show did well. They represent the range of what it was willing to try. An apocalypse, a Bond villain, a solo story for a minor character, a Little Shop of Horrors musical, a persona avalanche, a horror aesthetic, a love letter to a band. The show, at its best, never settled. Worth adding to this, the show is also quietly very good at Stan and Francine relationship episodes, which are a different register entirely from the genre experiments. Shallow Vows, where Stan confesses he fell in love with Francine for her looks, not her personality, and the episode follows the fallout from that admission, is a good example. It's not an apocalypse episode. It doesn't require a Bond villain. It just puts two people who are genuinely in love in a room with a genuinely difficult truth and watches what happens. The show does this as well as it does everything else, which often goes unnoticed because the genre experiments get more attention. But the domestic episodes are part of what keeps the show grounded. They're the evidence that Barker and Weitzman cared about these two people, specifically, not just about the situations they could put them in. There's a pattern across these episodes that's worth noting. In every case, the genre or premise the show is operating inside isn't a costume. It's not decorative. The show doesn't put its characters in a Bond parody so it can make James Bond jokes. It puts Roger specifically in a Bond villain role because Roger has the psychology of a Bond villain. And exploring that psychology inside the Bond framework reveals something true about the character. The apocalypse in Rapture's Delight isn't just a backdrop for chaos. It's the specific context that forces Stan to reckon with his own selfishness in a way no domestic situation could have done as efficiently. Every unusual premise in American Dad is chosen because it fits the specific thing the episode is trying to explore about its specific characters. The genre serves the character, not the other way around. That's rarer than it sounds. Most animated sitcoms that do genre episodes use them decoratively. Halloween episode, Christmas episode, Western episode. The setting changes, the characters behave the same, as always, and the jokes are the setting-specific jokes. American Dad treats its genre episodes as the most efficient available tool for whatever it's trying to understand that week. The result is that even the most formally strange episodes feel personal. And since we're talking about the show at its best, this seems like the right moment to talk about Roger's personas properly. Because the persona system is probably the most distinctive creative decision American Dad made. And what it became is considerably more elaborate than it started out. The original function of the personas was practical. Roger couldn't leave the house without risking exposure. So the writers gave him disguises, physical costumes, that allowed him to go out into Langley Falls without being identified as the alien living in the Smith's attic. Simple enough. A wig, a coat, a different name. Early episodes established this as a workable mechanic and didn't push it much further. The writers started asking a different question though. Not what costume is Roger wearing, but who is this person? And once they started building the personas as actual characters, with histories and relationships and recurring lives outside the Smith household, the system became something considerably richer. Roger doesn't just wear costumes. Roger's personas have full lives, mortgages, jobs, families, criminal records. Several of them are married. Some of them have children they have raised to adulthood. Some of them are in prison, serving sentences for crimes Roger committed under their identities. Several of them are dead, buried in cemeteries around Langley Falls, because Roger took on a persona long enough for it to age and die. Some of them have graduated from universities. One of them has a degree from Howard University. The scope of this is genuinely staggering once you add it up. Roger has been on Earth since 1947. He's had more than 60 years to accumulate lives. The personas aren't disguises so much as parallel existences, each one inhabited fully enough that it develops its own reality. Let's talk about some of the ones that recurred most. Rick E. Spanish is probably the most notorious. The show treats the name like a trauma trigger. When the name is mentioned in the presence of anyone who has encountered the persona, the reaction is immediate and visceral. Flashbacks to terrible things, avoidance, genuine distress. Ricky Spanish has done things so consistently appalling that an entire montage of his crimes functions as a joke about the length of the list. The episode specifically focused on Ricky Spanish follows Steve Smith on a crusade to prove that Ricky can be redeemed. Steve believes in people. Steve believes in second chances. Steve is completely and devastatingly wrong. The episode ends with Steve forced to accept that some things cannot be rehabilitated. It's a funny episode about lost innocence. Wheels and the Legman is the recurring detective duo Roger created with Steve, and it's the warmest recurring persona because it's genuinely collaborative. Steve plays Wheels, a paraplegic detective confined to a wheelchair. Roger plays the Legman, his able-bodied partner with a troubled past and a specific character mythology Roger invented in elaborate detail. The Legman was apparently a NASCAR driver who swerved to avoid hitting a baby, and the baby was somehow also the Legman. Their operation charges $20 a day plus expenses. Their office receptionist is a stuffed bear named Teddy Bonkers. Stan has appeared in the Wheels and Legman universe as Papa Wheelie, his own detective alter ego, a recurring joke that Klaus has summarized most efficiently. You pick some boring case, you bicker, then you solve it. The solution usually being that Roger is the culprit, which is accurate. The Wheels and Legman episodes have a specific quality that the more aggressive Roger persona episodes don't always have. They're about something real. Steve's friendship with Roger is the emotional core of several of them, and there's a tenderness to watching Steve take the game completely seriously, treating the stuffed bear receptionist as a real receptionist, filing real case notes, treating Roger's invented Legman mythology as established fact. Roger finds most relationships disposable. Steve is one of the exceptions. The Wheels and Legman episodes are where the show shows you why. Professor Jordan Edelstein was one of the earlier named personas, created when Roger and Francine were alone in the house and decided to do a role play. Roger became Professor Edelstein, a Harvard political science professor with a 140 IQ and a colourful past. Francine became his wife, Amanda Lane. Their dinner party game devolved rapidly into a full parody of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, with Roger and Francine inventing increasingly damning fictional backstories for each other's characters and the situation escalating into screaming and recrimination. The episode is a reminder that Francine and Roger are actually well matched as chaos generators, and that the show's most interesting pairings are occasionally ones you might not have expected. Roy Rogers McFreely is born out of Roger's revenge against Stan. Ref Stan forgets to pick up grenadine for Roger's cocktail. Deeply offended by this, and with the specific anger of someone for whom a small slight justifies a large response, assumes the persona of Roy Rogers McFreely and gets himself elected chairman of the Homeowners Association. He immediately uses the position to make Stan's life miserable. Fire hydrant in front of the house, car towed repeatedly, regulations designed specifically to target the things Stan values. Stan, who normally worships authority and institutions, is forced to join a neighborhood resistance movement to fight the Homeowners Association. He becomes the counterculture. Roger wins, then moves on. Dr. Penguin is the therapist persona, and it's the one with the most direct utility to the show's storytelling. Roger as Dr. Penguin becomes the Smith family's actual therapist. When he disappears in one episode and Klaus attempts to fill the role in his absence, the family falls apart almost immediately, which tells you something about how dependent the Smiths have become on the persona system without necessarily understanding that they are. They rely on Roger's endless roles to provide things they can't get from each other directly. A therapist, a wedding planner, a detective partner, a college professor for an evening. Jeannie Gold is the wedding planner, and she's good at the job. She has 2 adult sons she somehow raised while inhabiting the persona part-time, and she uses them as videographers. She will send an assassin after you if you give her inadequate vendor support. Her other career, advertised on Mexican billboards, is a separate matter. The Kevin Bacon persona is worth mentioning because it's the most conceptually absurd of them. Roger puts on a prosthetic version of Kevin Bacon's nose and gets mistaken for the actual celebrity. He uses the identity to get free things, behave terribly, and escape accountability for a hit-and-run accident. The actual Kevin Bacon gets arrested because of things Roger did while impersonating him. The episode is called Kevin Bacon Please, and the logic of it is completely airtight given its own premises. Time of the 250th episode, another Fox milestone, the show did something structurally interesting. Stan had to assume all of Roger's active personas when Roger took a vacation. Stan, whose entire personality is built on order and control and clear chains of authority, had to spend an episode maintaining the hundreds of lives Roger had constructed and currently maintained simultaneously. He failed at all of them. Langley Falls fell into chaos within 24 hours. The episode made the argument, without belabouring it, that the personas weren't just fun for Roger. They were load-bearing structures in the community. Roger wasn't just playing, he was holding something up. What's interesting about the persona system as a whole is that it asks a question the show never directly answers. Which one is the real Roger? Not the alien Roger, that's clearly the host. But among the hundreds of characters he inhabits, is there one that feels more authentically like him than the others? The Legman might be the argument for yes. It's the one persona created collaboratively with someone Roger actually cares about, built to serve a friendship rather than a scheme. But Ricky Spanish might be an equally strong argument, the most purely distilled version of Roger's worst impulses. The persona the show treats as most genuinely dangerous, the one retired not because Roger tired of it, but because his reputation under that name became too damaged, even by his standards. There's also the question of what happens to the personas when Roger isn't wearing them. The show occasionally implies that the personas continue to exist in some form when Roger isn't actively inhabiting them. Some of them have children. Some of those children have been shown without Roger present. Whether the personas have independent existence, or whether Roger is somehow manifesting these lives during the gaps the audience doesn't see, is never resolved, and the show is smart enough to leave it unresolved, because the ambiguity is more interesting than the answer. Tearjerker is worth returning to here from a persona angle rather than a pure episode angle, because he illustrates something specific about how Roger uses personas emotionally. Tearjerker isn't just a costume Roger put on for one story. He's a version of Roger who wanted something: recognition, artistic validation, the experience of being taken seriously as a creator, and who translated the sting of rejection into the most elaborate possible response. That's very Roger. The persona is the mechanism. The genuine desire underneath it is still Roger's. Tearjerker's plan to kill audiences with sadness is preposterous, but the wound that motivated it is recognizably real. All of Roger's best personas carry something like that underneath the absurdity. A real feeling wearing a ridiculous suit. That's what separates them from pure costume comedy. There's always something true at the bottom of the character, something Roger is working through or running from, even when the execution is completely unhinged. The 200th episode gave the whole system its most literal expression. What if all the personas were simultaneously real? The answer the show gave was the apocalypse. 200 Rogers, all physical, all operating on their own established logic, which is, in retrospect, a reasonable extrapolation. Now let's talk about theories, because American Dad has developed a community of people who've spent a lot of time thinking carefully about what the show might be doing underneath what it appears to be doing. It's a quieter community than the ones around, say, the SpongeBob nuclear theory or the Stewie consciousness theory from Family Guy, but what they've come up with is genuinely interesting, and a few of the theories the show itself has seemed to acknowledge. Let's start with the one that's most structurally ambitious. The virtual world theory proposes that the entire events of American Dad are a CIA simulation. Stan Smith either volunteered for the experiment or was placed in it without full consent. The show is not a depiction of real life in Langley Falls. It's a controlled environment designed to test something. Whether what's being tested is Stan's loyalty, his decision-making, his psychological resilience, or something else entirely, the theory doesn't fully commit to, but the evidence it points to is specific. The show has, on multiple occasions, broken the fourth wall in ways that suggest it knows it's a show. The episode Bar Mitzvah Hustle includes a scene where Stan is unable to remember his lines during what should be a normal family conversation, and the camera pulls back to reveal the Smith house is a television set. Klaus is shown as a man in a giant fish suit in front of a green screen. The episode Bullocks to Stan ends with Stan entering what appears to be an actual table read. These aren't dream sequences. They're presented as momentary glimpses of the reality underneath the apparent reality. Whether this is the show making self-referential jokes about its own artificiality, a fairly common animated sitcom device, or something more deliberately layered, is genuinely hard to determine. But the theory works because the floating timeline, the consequence-free reset between episodes, the way characters return to baseline, regardless of what happened to them last week, all of it fits the simulation template cleanly. If you already believe the show has an unusual relationship with its own continuity, the virtual world theory gives you a framework to understand why. The Roger replacement theory is darker and honestly quite difficult to fully dismiss once you've heard it. It proposes that Roger didn't crash on Earth by accident, he was sent here. His real mission, the crash test dummy origin story as a cover, is to eventually replace all humans on Earth with his personas. The accumulation of hundreds of identities across decades, each one with full human documentation and social infrastructure, is not a hobby. It's progress. Each persona represents another piece of the replacement infrastructure being built. The evidence cited is mostly circumstantial, but consistent. Roger has been on Earth since 1947 and shows no sign of wanting to leave permanently. His personas have real lives, children, careers, property, community relationships. Jeff Fisher, being launched into space during Season 9, provided a convenient source of human biological data for study before he was removed from the household. The 200th episode, where all 200 personas took simultaneous physical form, is interpreted by theory adherents not as an accident, but as a prototype, a test run of mass replacement that got out of control. What gives this theory some resonance is what we already know about Roger's biology. He must release unpleasantness or it poisons him. His personas are, in one reading, release valves. In another reading, they're infrastructure. The question is whether Roger is building an escape from his own unpleasantness, or something considerably more ambitious. The show never answers this. It probably won't. The Stan Never Learns theory is the one the show itself addressed most directly, in the episode Rough Trade, where Roger says to Stan, "Stan, there's something you should know about me. I don't learn lessons." It's played as a line about Roger, but it's the line most applicable to Stan. Stan's inability to retain the moral conclusion of any given episode is not a writing inconsistency. This is the argument the theory makes. It's deliberate architecture. Stan is a character who fundamentally cannot change. Not because he's stupid, he isn't, but because the ideology he inhabits doesn't have a mechanism for genuine revision. He can learn specific tactical facts. He can update his understanding of particular situations. But the underlying framework through which he interprets the world, the rigid hierarchy of loyalty, the belief that force resolves problems, the conviction that his instincts are correct by default, that framework is locked. The comedy is watching him repeatedly reach wrong conclusions from within an unchangeable system. The show seems to agree with this reading. It's referenced it directly. Whether that makes the theory confirmed or just self-aware is a matter of interpretation. The Klaus theory is the quietest one, and it's the one that stays with me longest. Klaus has lived in a fishbowl in the Smith household for years. Visibility into every conversation that takes place in that kitchen. He speaks multiple languages. He has demonstrated across multiple episodes that he is strategically intelligent in ways the family doesn't fully credit because they're too busy dismissing him. His ostensible powerlessness, stuck in a bowl, unable to move independently, treated as furniture by half the family, is interpreted by this theory as a choice rather than a limitation. The argument is that Klaus runs the household, not through force or visible authority, but through information and positioning. He knows everything that happens in that kitchen. He has years of data on every family member's psychology. He deploys what he knows at specific moments, subtly shifting outcomes, maintaining his own position, ensuring that the Smiths remain dependent on him without understanding why. The occasional moments where the family tells him to shut up in unison are moments where they're resisting something they can't quite name. I can't tell you this is true. The show hasn't confirmed it and probably won't, but it's the kind of theory that makes you re-watch Klaus's scenes differently, paying attention to what he's watching rather than what he's saying, noticing the moments where his quiet observation of a scene comes just before a decision someone makes that perhaps they shouldn't have. And then there's a meta-theory that the show itself has practically canonized through its own fourth wall moments, that the Smiths are actors, filming a TV show, and the family dynamics are partly performative. The recurring moments of the show, acknowledging its own artificiality, the set revelation, the table read, the times characters reference their own consistency, all point in this direction. Whether this is the show being self-aware and playful, or something more deliberate is, again, genuinely undecidable. Which is maybe the point. American Dad has always seemed most interested in the questions that don't resolve cleanly. There's one more theory worth mentioning, not because it has as much specific evidence as the others, but because of what it says about how fans have come to relate to the show's emotional core. The theory proposes that Roger's biological requirement to release unpleasantness, the trait we discussed earlier, the one that means his cruelty is necessity rather than preference, has quietly shaped who the Smiths are over years of exposure. People who live near someone who must externalize toxicity adapt over time in ways they don't notice. They develop tolerance, they build antibodies, they learn to absorb things that would destroy someone encountering them fresh. Followed to its conclusion, the Smiths are not an ordinary family that happens to have an alien in the attic. They're a family that has been slowly and continuously changed by proximity to something that requires them to be strong enough to survive him. Francine's hidden capacity for violence, Stan's ability to absorb catastrophic failures and reset within an episode, Steve's resilience under repeated humiliation, Haley's stubbornness, Klaus's patience in the bowl, watching everything, waiting. All of these traits could be read as adaptive responses to years of Roger. Nobody has confirmed any of this. The show probably won't. But it's the kind of theory that makes you rewatch the Smith family dynamics differently, paying attention to which traits make sense for these specific people in their normal lives, and which ones make more sense if you consider what they've been exposed to for a very long time. They're not normal. They're normal in the way that people who've adapted to something extraordinary become normal. They've built resistance. Roger gave it to them, in his specific biological way, through years of requiring them to survive him, and Roger doesn't do lessons, but the Smiths might have learned one from him anyway, without either side noticing. Now let's talk about the move to TBS, because it's a significant chapter in the show's history, and one that tends to get compressed in the broader story of what American Dad is. In November 2013, it was announced that Mike Barker had departed the show. He had been there for 10 seasons, co-creator, executive producer, co-showrunner. His departure wasn't accompanied by any publicised falling out. He simply left, remaining under an overall contract with 20th Century Fox Television and stepping away from the day-to-day work of running American Dad after a decade. No drama in the public account of it, just a notice, and then he was gone. Barker H. Barker had been Weitzman's writing partner from before American Dad existed. They came up through Family Guy together, collaborated on the American Dad pitch, and had co-run the show as a unit for several years. Ship ending was, for the show, a structural change, as significant as the network move that came shortly after. Matt Weitzman serves as the sole showrunner of American Dad. Question at that moment for the writers for Fox, probably for Weitzman himself, was whether the show would maintain its identity without one of the two people who had originally defined it. The answer turned out to be yes, mostly because the identity had by that point been embedded deeply enough in the writing staff and the production culture that it wasn't dependent on any single person maintaining it. And then came the move to TBS. Fox in 2014 was reconfiguring its Sunday night lineup to make room for live-action comedy. Brooklyn Nine-Nine had arrived. The animation domination format that had defined Sunday evenings for a long time was being renegotiated. American Dad, after 11 seasons on Fox, was moved to TBS, a cable network that at the time was positioning itself as a comedy destination with programming like Conan, Angie Tribeca, and People of Earth. The Fox farewell episode was Blag Snast, a love story, which aired September 21, 2014. It featured Kim Kardashian voicing a pink, furry female alien Roger hooks up with. It included another chapter of the Golden Turd saga. It was, given that the show was leaving a network it had called home for almost a decade, a surprisingly unsentimentally strange episode to go out on, which is very American Dad. The first TBS episode was Blonde Ambition, which aired October 20, 2014, and functionally felt like business as usual. That continuity, the sense that the show had simply moved rather than transformed, was the most important achievement of the transition. Barker had told press before the move, "It's going to be the same American Dad, just in a different place." And it was. The tone didn't change. The characters didn't change. The willingness to do weird things didn't change. What changed was the practical freedom of being on cable rather than broadcast, slightly more permissive standards, slightly more room in the content. "You can swear a little bit more," Weitzman summarised. That was the TBS deal, essentially. What the TBS years produced creatively was arguably the show's most experimental period, the Rabbit Ears horror episode. The full black and white silent film that served as the final episode of the TBS era, called What Great Advancements, set in an alternate past where Stan is a farmer who dreams of making it big as an inventor. The Jeff-centric solo episode, titled Lost in Space, Sonar Assistant episode that introduced Rogue Roger's tumor-derived son. A multiverse episode, an intra-body Fantastic Voyage episode. A number of Halloween and Christmas episodes that the show has always done particularly well. The show during TBS was also where certain character arcs that had been developing slowly across many seasons started to pay off. The Golden Turd saga reaching its climax in the 300th episode. Jeff Fisher's arc from stoner in a van to something considerably stranger and more mythologically elaborate. Klaus receiving extended episodes that took his frustrations seriously rather than just mining them for quick jokes. American Dad's critical standing during the TBS years is a separate story, and an interesting one. The show had always been underestimated relative to Family Guy, partly because of the early "it's just a knockoff" framing that had stuck, partly because Family Guy was louder and more culturally dominant. But during the TBS years, that framing started to shift. More pieces appeared making the argument that American Dad was the better show. More overlooked gem framings, more acknowledgement that the genre experimentation and character depth were things the other MacFarlane shows hadn't managed in the same way. Whether or not you agree with that comparative assessment, the critical rehabilitation was real. The show on TBS was being taken more seriously than the show on Fox had been, which is ironic given that the show was essentially unchanged. The 20th A soundtrack album, American Dad! Greatest Hits, featuring 19 original songs from across the show's history, was released in 2024, released in October 2024, ahead of the season 21 premiere. Tracks included Good Morning USA, We're Red and We're Gay, Girl You Need a Shot of B12, and a remastered version of Daddy's Gone from Hot Water. It was a small acknowledgement that the show had accumulated enough musical output to fill a genuine retrospective. Season 21 ran from October 2024 to March 2025. It was the 10th and final season to premiere on TBS. It's also worth spending a moment on what the TBS decade meant for the show's audience. When a show moves from network television to cable, even popular cable, even comedy-focused cable, it loses casual viewers. People who tuned in because American Dad happened to be on at 9 p.m. on Fox were not necessarily going to follow it to TBS and reconfigure their viewing habits. The audience that remained was, by definition, the one that actively wanted to be there. This is not always a good thing for a show. Smaller, more committed audiences can pull creative teams toward niche choices that serve the faithful and lose the broader potential. But American Dad seems to have navigated this cleanly. The writing didn't become insular or self-referential in alienating ways. The long-running sagas, the Golden Turd, the Persona mythology, Jeff's Arc, were written to work both for people who had been watching since Season 1 and for people encountering them fresh in Season 15. The TBS years also coincided with streaming becoming the primary way most people watch older television. Hulu acquired streaming rights to American Dad in 2017, which meant the back catalogue became broadly accessible in a way it hadn't been. This is probably part of what sustained the show's cultural presence during a decade when its live viewership numbers were, by broadcast standards, modest. People were finding it on streaming and then following it forward. A different audience pipeline, but a real one. One more thing about the TBS era. The supervising director for the show from the very first episode, Ron Huart, retired at the end of Season 21's production. He had held that role across the entire run. Fox and TBS both. From pilot to the final TBS episode, his departure at the natural conclusion of the TBS chapter has a neatness to it that the show itself might have appreciated. There are a few specific TBS-era episodes that deserve mention alongside the ones we've already discussed, because they illustrate the experimental ambition of that period clearly. The Season 14 episode Rabbit Ears introduced a genuinely unsettling horror register the show hadn't used before. Persona Assistant introduced Rogue, Roger's homunculus son, grown from a tumour when Roger was under too much stress, a character so specifically bizarre that he could only have existed in this version of the show, the one that had long since stopped worrying about accessibility. And the final TBS episode, What Great Advancements, set in an alternate, silent black and white universe, managed to be both a standalone formal experiment and a graceful farewell to the network that had hosted the show's most adventurous years. All of these episodes required the production team to do something they hadn't done before. All of them worked. That consistency of creative ambition across a decade of TBS production, without the large broadcast audience and without the cultural visibility of the Fox years, is one of the things American Dad doesn't get enough credit for. The show got weirder, and by most measures, better during the years when fewer people were watching. That's not a common trajectory. Since we're on the topic of what makes the show distinctive, let's talk about the music for a bit, because it's an aspect of American Dad that doesn't get discussed as much as it probably should. The show has always had a stronger musical identity than most animated sitcoms in its genre. Not in the way that, say, Bob's Burgers or Steven Universe have made music central to their identity, American Dad doesn't commit to music as a defining characteristic, but it turns up more consistently and more ambitiously than the casual viewer might expect. The theme song is where it starts. Good Morning, USA is a full, earnest, brass and percussion number performed by the cast. It sounds like a 4th of July parade composed by someone who genuinely loves 4th of July parades. And that sincerity is part of the joke, but not all of it. The theme works because it's actually a good song, properly constructed, properly performed, properly patriotic. It earns the laugh it gets by being too good to dismiss as pure parody. Stan's enthusiasm for America is real, even when it's wrong. The theme captures that. Seth MacFarlane's personal musical sensibilities feed into the show more obviously than his public profile might suggest. He has made 3 albums of jazz standards and big band material. Music is better than words. In 2011, Holiday for Swing in 2014, and No One Ever Tells You in 2015. The last of those hit number 1 on the Billboard Jazz Albums chart. This is a genuine artistic interest, not a celebrity side project. And that interest in orchestral arrangement and jazz aesthetics, in music that has craft and formality and warmth simultaneously, runs through the show's scoring and its original musical moments. The landmark musical episode is Hot Water, which we discussed in the Best Episodes section. Its Lit-It's Little Shop of Horrors structure, its CeeLo Green narration, and its collection of original songs all mark it as the show's most formally complete musical statement. The songs written for it by Asa Taccone are worth finding if you haven't heard them, particularly Daddy's Gone, which is an unexpectedly affecting piece of music about a son's grief over an absent father, written by Asa Taccone and performed by Scott Grimes and Seth MacFarlane. Here are musical moments scattered across the whole run that are worth noting. The My Morning Straitjacket episode, which we also discussed, is built entirely around the music of a real band, with their actual songs used throughout, and the episode structured as an extended meditation on why that music matters. The episode treats My Morning Jacket's work with the same earnestness that the show treats its characters. It doesn't mock the music or use it as a punchline. The music is the point. There's also a recurring quality in the show's score, composed primarily by Walter Murphy, Ron Jones, and Joel McNeely across different periods. That leans toward orchestral arrangements that treat the show's absurd events with musical sincerity, and drives a horse into a CIA briefing room. The score sounds like the horse belongs there. When the hot tub starts singing, the orchestra takes it completely seriously. This is a choice. It's the same choice that makes the show's genre parody episodes work. The music doesn't undercut the premise, it commits to it. The 20th anniversary soundtrack released in 2024, American Dad Greatest Hits, is a useful document of the show's musical output because it collects 19 tracks from across the run and demonstrates the range. Broad patriotic anthems, holiday novelty songs, character songs that work as standalone pieces of pop songwriting, the comedy-tinged music hall number from the Persona episodes, the earnest ballad from Hot Water, all of it coexisting on one album in a way that suggests the show had a consistent musical sensibility even when it was doing very different things. There's something worth saying about why a show with this kind of musical ambition doesn't get discussed in those terms more often. Part of it is probably the Family Guy comparison, which frames the show as the other MacFarlane show, the one you watch if you want something similar to Family Guy. Family Guy has its own musical moments, but it doesn't have the same consistency of musical ambition that American Dad has. The comparison flattens American Dad in ways that the music particularly suffers from. When people approach the show expecting it to be one thing, they sometimes miss what it actually is in areas like this. The music is one of the clearest signals that Barker and Weitzman built something specific. A show that cared about craft across registers, including musical ones. There's a particular strand of American Dad episodes worth naming on the music topic, which is the Christmas episodes. The show has produced a number of Christmas episodes across its run, and several of them are musically ambitious in ways the standard animated sitcom Christmas episode isn't. Rapture's Delight is the most extreme example, a Christmas episode that uses the genre as a starting point and then goes somewhere completely different. But even the more straightforwardly seasonal episodes tend to have musical moments that are given genuine production care, with arrangements that feel intentional rather than perfunctory. The show also has a specific relationship with licensed music that's worth noting. Where Family Guy uses pop culture references and recognizable songs as punchlines, the song itself is the joke. American Dad tends to use music emotionally. The Wax Fang song Moo Jest Tick in the Lost in Space. Jeff episode isn't a gag, it's the emotional centerpiece of the scene. The My Morning Jacket music in My Morning Straight Jacket isn't there to be recognizable. It's there because the episode is genuinely about what the music does to the person hearing it. The licensed music is chosen for what it contributes to the moment, not for recognition value. This is probably a reflection of Barker's personal investment in the music episode and Weitzman's consistent oversight of the show's tone. But it's also just a quality the show developed and maintained, taking music seriously as a storytelling tool rather than a reference delivery mechanism. The original songs from the show have a similar quality. They're written to work as songs, not just as jokes set to music. Daddy's Gone would be a moving piece of music, even if you'd never heard of American Dad. Good Morning USA is a genuinely well-constructed theme. The songs from Hot Water have structure and melody and craft. They aren't parody in the dismissive sense. They're original work that happens to be funny, which is considerably harder to pull off. Scott Grimes, who voices Steve, released 2 albums of his own during the show's run. C is a significant part of several of the show's musical episodes. There's a quality he brings to Steve's singing, earnest, slightly uncool, genuinely musical, that fits perfectly with the character and with what the show tends to do with music. All of this adds up to something that American Dad rarely advertises as a selling point, but that's clearly been important to the people making it. The show cares about music. It shows. There's something in the show's musical sensibility that connects back to where we started, to Seth MacFarlane's personal interest in big band and jazz, in the kind of music that requires craft and arrangement and sincerity. That aesthetic runs through American Dad more quietly than it runs through MacFarlane's solo albums. But it's there in the way the show scores a genuinely emotional moment with something orchestral and deliberate, rather than reaching for an ironic needle drop. The music earns the feelings the episodes are going for, or tries to anyway, and that it consistently tries is itself something. The American Dad Greatest Hits album from 2024 is worth returning to as a closing thought on this section because of what it implies. 19 tracks across 2 decades of production, selected as representative of the show's musical output. That's not a novelty album, that's a catalogue, a document of a show that took music seriously enough that it produced enough of it to fill a genuine retrospective. Most animated sitcoms in this genre don't get retrospective music compilations because there isn't enough original material to fill one. American Dad did. And that brings us more or less to the present, because the story of American Dad is still being written. In March and April 2022, TBS announced that it was stepping away from scripted original programming. It wasn't specifically about American Dad, it was about TBS's overall strategy shifting away from original content. But the implication for the show was immediate. Season 21, then currently airing, would be the last on TBS. Weitzman has described what the period that followed felt like. There was a period of time where we didn't know what was going on, he told The Wrap earlier this year. His response to that uncertainty was to just write a script, keep working, figure out what comes next when someone tells you what comes next. He'd expected, if the show continued at all, that it might move to Hulu, which already held streaming rights to the library. That didn't happen. What happened instead was Fox. Fox took the show back. Renewed for seasons 22 through 25, a 4-season commitment that extends the show well past the 400-episode milestone. The season 22 premiere aired on February 22nd, 2026, back on the same network, in a Sunday night slot, after a decade away. Weitzman's reaction to this was, in his own words, disbelief. "I did not expect this to happen at Fox, to come back here. We were on Fox for 8 years and then TBS for 10 years, so when TBS wasn't going to make any new scripted shows, I thought we'll probably go to Hulu if we come back. That didn't end up happening. We won the jackpot." He also said, "I don't even know how often it's ever happened that you go away for 10 years and then suddenly arrive back at home base. I think I giggled for about 3 days." There's something genuinely unusual about this trajectory. Shows get cancelled and stay cancelled. Shows move to streaming and don't come back to broadcast. Shows that leave network television after a decade rarely return to it. American Dad did all 3 unconventional things in sequence. It moved from Fox to cable on TBS. It survived for almost a decade there, and then it came back to Fox. Those steps was described as unlikely at the time it happened. The practical differences of returning to Fox are modest. The network operates under broadcast standards, which means slightly fewer expletives than TBS allowed. We're going to say a few less curse words like we used to get away with on TBS, Weitzman noted, but I like to think that's not what the show is. CE Cast is the same. The tone Barker and Weitzman established in those early seasons, and that Weitzman has maintained through the TBS decade, and now into the Fox return, is, as far as anyone who's been watching can tell, the same show. Weitzman's description of the show's evolution over 20 years is worth sitting with. We used to be this political show, and then we became much more of a family show, and now we've just gotten bigger and weirder. I wouldn't have it any other way. Bigger, weirder, still going. As of May 2026, 397 episodes of American Dad have aired. The 4-season Fox renewal means the show will produce several dozen more. The voice cast, Seth MacFarlane, Wendy Schaal, Scott Grimes, Rachel McFarlane, D. Bradley Baker, first recorded these characters in 2004 and 2005 when American Dad was beginning production and premiering on Fox Raptors, haven't aged visually or vocally. The world they inhabit on Cherry Street in Langley Falls continues to absorb the consequences of all the increasingly strange storytelling the show has produced since. There's a Comic-Con appearance from 2022 where Weitzman mentioned the possibility of a crossover between American Dad and The Orville, McFarlane's live-action sci-fi series. It was floated rather than announced. Whether it ever happens is unclear. But the idea of it, the CII agent who lives with an alien crossing into a proper science fiction universe, has a certain logical appeal. What's notable about American Dad at this stage of its existence is that it doesn't seem to be coasting. The experimental episodes of the TBS era weren't the work of a show going through the motions. The return to Fox wasn't accompanied by announcements of major reinvention or course correction. The show knows what it is, has known for a while, and keeps doing it. That's rarer than it should be. The 4-season Fox renewal is also, practically speaking, a statement about the show's commercial value that's easy to overlook. Fox doesn't commit to 4 seasons of anything without believing the property justifies it. The fact that American Dad, a show that premiered after the 2005 Super Bowl as a political satire about the Bush era, that spent a decade on a cable network most people associate with late-night reruns, that never had the cultural saturation of The Simpsons or the meme dominance of Family Guy, can have plans announced to return to network television in 2026. Says something about what it built quietly over the course of its run. Tells something durable, not flashy, not culturally dominant in the way that commands think pieces and retrospectives, just consistently good at what it does, and reliable enough that people keep coming back to it, and flexible enough that it keeps finding new things to try without losing the thread of what it started as. There's also something interesting about what extremely long-running shows reveal about themselves over time. Shows that make it to 20-plus seasons do so because they found something true about their characters early and never let go of it. The Simpsons found something true about family dysfunction and suburban aspiration. Family Guy found something true about chaos and the interrupted joke. American Dad found something true about the specific kind of person who loves a thing, a country, a family, an institution, so completely and so badly that the love keeps creating problems. Stan loves America the way a person can love anything too much. That's a real thing. It's a recognizable thing. And the show has never stopped being about it, even as everything around it got stranger and funnier and more experimental. The season 22 premiere included, per Weitzman, one joke about being back on Fox, and then business as usual. That sounds right. 20-plus years. The same people, the same house on Cherry Street, the same alien in the attic who's required by his own biology to make everyone's life slightly worse, and who the family keeps choosing to keep around anyway. Weitzman put it better than I can. We just kind of try to remain true to the characters and the essence of the show. Obviously, it has evolved. We used to be this political show, and then we became much more of a family show, and now we've just gotten bigger and weirder. I wouldn't have it any other way. Bigger, weirder, back on Fox. And that's more or less the whole story, at least the version of it we can tell from here. American Dad started as something specific and became something harder to categorize. A show born from election frustration and a pitch about a right-wing CII agent and his liberal daughter, which spent a few seasons being exactly that. And then slowly, without any single, decisive moment of change, became a show about a family containing an alien, a German man in a fishbowl, and a CII agent who applies armed response logic to grocery shopping. The political premise receded. The character weirdness expanded to fill the space it left. And somehow, across more than 20 seasons and 2 networks, the writers kept finding things to do with these specific people that felt like extensions of who they were